Conservatives say the current approach to China isn't working. They want the federal government to get tougher on the communist regime.
Canadians are worried we aren't doing enough to stand up to Chinese aggression. But now is the time to act. This is what our motion intends to do. First, we call upon the government to finally grow a spine and make a decision on Huawei's involvement in Canada's critical 5G network within 30 days of the adoption of this motion. Second, we ask that the government develop a robust plan, as Australia has done, to combat China's growing foreign influence operations here in Canada and its increasing intimidation of Canadians.
Those comments come as the government introduces sweeping new laws to guard your online privacy. For more, I'm joined by Navdeep Bains. He's the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. He's here in Ottawa. Hi, Minister Bains. Good to see you. Thanks for making time for the show.
Thank you very much for having me on.
I know the opposition's primary criticism of this bill has to do with Huawei, and I'm going to ask you about that in a second. But I want to ask you about the legislation itself, because I heard you speaking earlier to reporters about it. And what really jumped out at me is the level of fines, right? And I know you're very much pointing to them. It's steep fines for businesses that don't or that contravene essentially what you've put out. What I'm curious about, though, is if you could, in layman's terms, describe for our viewers specifically, like, what would a business have to do to get a $25 million fine?
So it's a great question, Vashi, that you pose, because enforcement is a key part of making sure that we protect Canadians and their privacy. When we talk about giving Canadians more control, there's got to be meaningful accountability. So, for example, we've given order-making powers to the Privacy Commissioner to investigate, to look into potential concerns raised by Canadians. And if a company is obstructing that or intentionally trying to deceive the Privacy Commissioner, that could potentially lead to significant fines. As you indicated, 5% of global revenue. So these are meaningful fines, the strongest amongst the G7.
Just to follow up on that, though, so they go against something the Privacy Commissioner said, for example. If they take your data, they steal it and send it to, they take it and sell it to someone else, is that something that could produce a fine?
That's a great illustration of how your data is taken without your consent, given to a third party to maybe further manipulate Canadians. And so that's a very good example of a potentially where serious fines can occur to companies and organizations that go down that path. And this is what we've done today, is address those concerns by making sure that the Privacy Commissioner has the order-making powers, to the ability to ask companies to stop collecting data if it's done so without proper consent, to delete data as well, and to make recommendations for fines to the tribunal. And that's a key element when it comes to accountability. And this is important not only for Canadians, but also provides clear rules to businesses as well.
Okay, so as I mentioned off the top, the Conservatives say if you were really serious about digital security and digital privacy, you would ban Huawei, your government would ban Huawei from Canada's 5G network. Why have you not done that yet?
Well, I continue to, and same with my colleagues, work with our national security experts. We continue to do our due diligence and our homework. We've been very clear that any decision that we will make will be done in the best interest of Canadians. And when we're in a position to announce such a decision when it comes to the deployment of 5G technology, we want to make sure it's done in a safe and secure manner, and we'll share that with Canadians.
Why has the review that you're describing, though, taken more than 2 years to complete? What's left to figure out?
Well, these are matters of national security, and that's one point that I wanted to raise, is we don't want partisan politics to dictate national security assessments. And Canadians can be assured that we are very committed to this overall process of reviewing the deployment of 5G technology. And we will make a decision that will not compromise the safety and security of Canadians.
But you just can't tell Canadians when. I mean, to be fair, your government, I remember Minister Goodale in the role of public safety saying in May, I think, of 2019, that it would come before the election. And then 2 months later, he said, no, it won't come before the election. Like, can you be more transparent, Minister, with all due respect, and let Canadians know, like, what kind of timeline are they looking at? So
Canadians should be assured that we're working with our allies, we're working with our partners, and and security experts to make sure that we do the appropriate due diligence. We will not compromise on Canadian safety and security, but we will not prejudge what the decision will be or when we'll make that decision. But I can tell you right now, this is a top of mind issue for our government.
How much pressure are you getting from our allies? You talk about conversations with our allies. All of Canada's, for example, Five Eyes allies have either banned or moved to restrict Huawei's access to 5G. Canada is now the laggard. How much pressure are you getting from them?
Look, we will not be bullied by or intimidated by any country when it comes to the decisions we make. We won't succumb to any pressure either. We will make a decision that's in our national interest, in the best interest of Canadians. I've been very consistent about that. Even today's legislation speaks to our desire to protect Canadians. Many Canadians now shop online, work online, learn online. And so we are very mindful to make sure that we have safe and secure networks, but also make sure that we protect the privacy of Canadians as well. And that's a commitment that our government has made, and we're following through on that. And today is a perfect example of legislation that is moving forward to protect Canadians.
Yes, certainly I'm not trying to take away from the legislation today and the measures you introduced. I'm just asking about, a file that has been on your desk and the public safety minister's desk for a long time. When you say, for example, that you won't be bullied, you won't be intimidated, you won't be pressured, that doesn't answer the question of whether or not someone is trying to or one of your allies is trying to. Are they?
What I'm underscoring is the importance that this decision will be made in our national interest. This is a decision that will speak to the concerns around Canadians' privacy, around the networks that we have here in Canada, and to make sure that we move forward in a manner that keeps Canadians safe and secure. This is a decision that would be done in our own national interest and not in the interest of another country.
Part and parcel of our national interest is, of course, what's happened to two innocent Canadian citizens, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, in China. Is your decision at all in any way connected to the court case against Meng Wanzhou playing out? Are you waiting until that is completed before you release a decision?
Our decision is an independent decision that's based on the assessment that we're doing with regards to the overall deployment of 5G. But you're right, we have a very complex relationship when it comes to China. There are many different issues that are at play. Of course, it is absolutely a priority for us to make sure that the arbitrary detention of the two Michaels is something that we continue to advocate for and make sure that they are released in a timely manner. This is an issue that I've raised with my counterparts whenever I have the opportunity internationally. I know my colleagues have and the Prime Minister has, and we'll continue to advocate for the release of the two Michaels. But when it comes to 5G and the deployment of 5G, we want to make a decision based on the technology and the safety and security of Canadians, and that's exactly what's taking place when we're doing the assessment.
So just to be clear, for the record, that means from your perspective, there is no connection between the two issues.
Yeah, the deployment of the technology, and again, it has so much promise, so much potential. We need to be thoughtful about that. But when it comes to the Michaels, this is the number one issue that we raise on a consistent basis with our Chinese counterparts, as well as our other allies across in different countries when we have that opportunity to do so. So from our perspective, making sure that the Michaels are released is a priority. And we've also been very clear that we're going to continue to assess the situation with regards to the deployment of 5G technologies.
Okay, Minister, I'll leave it there. I appreciate your time this evening, as always.
Thanks very much for having me on, Vashi.
Thank you. That's Navneet Bains. He's the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. Let's get the opposition's perspective on all of this. For that, I'm joined by Michael Chong. He's the Conservatives' Foreign Affairs critic. Hi, Mr. Chong. Good to see you as always.
Hi, Vashi. Great to be here.
So is your motion calls for, the motion that you've led, you've introduced, your party has introduced, calls for the government to make a decision within 30 days of adopting that motion on Huawei. You heard the minister, you were listening into that interview. He says national security considerations are still being reviewed. Is it possible that that is the case? Like, is that not a reason to not yet make a decision?
No, I think that's a false excuse. That's an excuse that doesn't hold any water. The government has all the information it needs to make a decision, and it's paralyzed by indecision. They said a year ago they were going to make a decision, and then they changed their mind and said that they were delaying it till after the election. Then they said that they were continuing to review it. Now we're over a year since the election and still no decision. So it's long past time for the government to make a decision on it. The 30-day timetable is reasonable, and it's consistent with the government's own timetable. You know, they were supposed to make a decision over a year ago, and then a year ago they said that they were coming forward with a new framework on China. That framework is supposed to be publicly revealed by December 21st at the end of the fall season. No new framework on China can be without a policy on Huawei. This motion is consistent with the delivery of that new framework. So it's a reasonable motion. I hope the government supports it. I think it's long past time for the government to make a decision. This is now actually presenting a threat to Canada's national security. There have been reports in the Globe and Mail, for example, that because of the government's indecision, a major Canadian telecommunications company, TELUS, has been purchasing Huawei equipment for its network. And contrary to an understanding between the Government of Canada and TELUS, it has installed this in 80 towers and sites around the National Capital Region. The Globe reports that the federal government is scrambling to get TELUS to remove this equipment because it presents a threat to Canada's national security. So the government's delay now is actually starting to threaten our security. It's long past time for them to make a decision.
So if you don't, though, believe that it's, as Mr. Baines claimed, national security concerns and review that is delaying the decision, what do you think the motivation for delay is?
I think it's just indicative of a broader problem in this government's decision-making. They delay, they're inconsistent, they're incoherent. You know, for example, 2 months ago in September, the foreign minister indicated that Canada was abandoning free trade talks with China. On the very same day, Ambassador Barton, Canada's ambassador to China, was telling an audience in Edmonton, including the Chinese ambassador to Canada, that Canada should do more in China, that we should expand trade with China. Last July, the foreign minister indicated to the House of Commons that it was considering the imposition of sanctions on Chinese officials responsible for the imposition of a draconian new national security law in Hong Kong in violation of international law. And the very next day, the government tells Reuters that that is off the table. That's no longer being considered. There's a broader pattern here of inconsistency and incoherence on part of this government. I think the delay and dithering on this decision is just part of that bigger pattern.
Could it though also have something to do with the nature of the relationship between Canada and China right now? And the question I posed to the minister around the two Canadians who are being detained. We've seen an escalation and sort of retribution from China through basically anything that Canada has done. Could that not be part of the consideration too? Like, imagine what would happen if Canada comes out and says, we've made this decision. I understand it's on principle, but what could happen to the two Michaels?
Well, I know one thing. The government's policy of appeasement toward China, its policy of passively letting China intimidate and threaten Canadians, Canadian interests and Canadian values isn't working. In fact, I think it's exposing us to more risk because China is treating Canada like a piñata, as it's done to other mid-sized democracies that haven't responded in kind. I think it's long past time, as conservatives we believe it's long past time, for the government to take a much stronger stand on China, to indicate to them that they can't do these sorts of things without repercussions. And so that's why we're calling on the government to take a stronger stand, to make a decision on Huawei, to come forward with a plan on foreign influence operations in order to protect Canada's interests. The government itself acknowledges that its China policy isn't working. That's the whole reason why they announced a year ago that they would be coming forward with a new framework on China. We await that new framework. We believe that any new framework must include a decision on Huawei and a plan to counter foreign influence operations here on Canadian soil.
Respectfully, Mr. Chung, Conservatives have struggled with the issue of China before, too. There are inconsistencies, with what you're saying right now. And for example, a Conservative-led government that approved a Nexen, the takeover of Nexen by a Chinese state-owned company, right? It's not the easiest country to approach when it comes to policy.
Well, I don't agree, respectfully, and here's why. I think things have changed with China in the last 3-4 years. I think before 2017, while there were irritants in the bilateral relationship, it never approached the level of the kinds of threats that we're seeing from China today. The government now has had the new reality of China for the last at least 3 years. It began in 2017 with a range of threats that China was directing towards Canadians and toward Canadian interests. And I think that's the difference between what happened before 2016 and what's happened after 2016. It's now been 3 years. The government is fully aware of the new attitude and the new belligerence of China, and it long ago should have taken action to stand up for our interests and for our values.
I certainly take your point that their actions towards Canada post-2016 have changed, but I guess their human rights records had big question marks over it prior to that. Unfortunately, I have to leave it there, and I know you have to get going too. Thanks, Mr. Chong. I appreciate your time this evening, as always.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.